In the majestic city of Riyadh, where skyscrapers rise like giants of glass and steel, defying the desert horizon, Isabel stepped off the plane with her heart racing, a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety within her. The city's searing air wrapped around her like an invisible blanket, so different from the gentle climate of her native Mexico. She had traveled thousands of kilometers, crossing oceans and continents, to witness her cousin Clara's wedding, an event that promised to rival the extravagance of the city itself. Isabel, with her green eyes that stood out against her features and her midnight black hair, felt out of place in this world of opulence and excess. Yet the joy of seeing her beloved cousin unite in marriage with a wealthy Arab man outweighed any sense of disorientation. The hotel where she was staying resembled more a palace than a mere place of rest, with fountains dancing to a silent melody and chandeliers cascading from the ceiling like waterfalls of crystal. Isabel was getting ready for the ceremony, her hands trembling as she thought of Carlos, her boyfriend of 15 years, who remained in Mexico, utterly distant and disconnected from her dreams and desires. The wedding was a true marvel, a spectacle brimming with imagination. Clara, radiant like an angel beneath a canopy of gold and silver threads, dazzled in a white gown adorned with pearls and diamonds that reflected the sunset's light. The groom, an elegant man with a warm smile, gazed at Clara with devotion, as though she were the brightest star in the desert sky. It was during the reception, with the air filled with the aromas of exotic spices and desert flowers, that Isabel first saw José, the groom's cousin. He moved among the guests with the grace of a feline in its element, his dark, deep eyes like oil wells capturing Isabel's gaze. For a brief moment, everything around her faded. Clara, happier than ever, approached Isabel with a knowing wink and introduced her to José. "This is my husband's cousin," she said with a smile that seemed to hold more than it revealed. "José, meet my favorite cousin, Isabel." Their words flowed like a spring in the desert, brimming with curiosity and excitement. José spoke Spanish with an exotic accent that fascinated Isabel, and soon they were sharing laughter and stories about their respective cultures. Before they realized it, hours had passed, unnoticed amidst the revelry of the ongoing celebration. As the night went on, Isabel found herself drifting further from her thoughts of Carlos, focusing entirely on the mysterious man before her. José was everything Carlos was not: attentive, eager to know her, and respectful of her opinions. Every word, every gesture seemed to invite her into a new world, brimming with possibilities. Watching them from a distance, Clara, with a shrewd look, approached Isabel as José stepped away for a moment. "Do you see what you've been missing all these years?" she whispered urgently. "That man is worth 100 Carlos. Don't waste your life on someone who doesn't value you." Clara's words echoed in Isabel's mind like a sound she couldn't silence. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life where her dreams were not ignored, and love was not a burden, but a source of joy and growth. It was during the reception, with the air filled with the aromas of exotic spices and desert flowers, that Isabel first saw José, the groom's cousin. He moved among the guests with the grace of a feline in its element, his dark, deep eyes like oil wells capturing Isabel's gaze. For a brief moment, everything around her faded. Clara, happier than ever, approached Isabel with a knowing wink and introduced her to José. "This is my husband's cousin," she said with a smile that seemed to hold more than it revealed. "José, meet my favorite cousin, Isabel." Their words flowed like a spring in the desert, brimming with curiosity and excitement. José spoke Spanish with an exotic accent that fascinated Isabel, and soon they were sharing laughter and stories about their respective cultures. Before they realized it, hours had passed, unnoticed amidst the revelry of the ongoing celebration. As the night went on, Isabel found herself drifting further from her thoughts of Carlos, focusing entirely on the mysterious man before her. José was everything Carlos was not: attentive, eager to know her, and respectful of her opinions. Every word, every gesture seemed to invite her into a new world, brimming with possibilities. Watching them from a distance, Clara, with a shrewd look, approached Isabel as José stepped away for a moment. "Do you see what you've been missing all these years?" she whispered urgently. "That man is worth 100 Carlos. Don't waste your life on someone who doesn't value you." Clara's words echoed in Isabel's mind like a sound she couldn't silence. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life where her dreams were not ignored, and love was not a burden, but a source of joy and growth. The return to Mexico felt like waking from a dream, plunging Isabel back into a gray, monotonous reality. She walked through the streets of her hometown, every corner and building reminding her of the life she had left behind, even if only for a while. The familiar scent of tacos and the bustling markets that once comforted her now seemed like faint shadows of the vitality she had experienced in Riyadh. Carlos awaited her in his apartment, his face a mixture of relief and reproach. "You're finally back," he said, without looking up from his phone, uninterested in Isabel's journey or her experiences. A wave of guilt washed over her as she thought of José's sweetness and attentiveness, so different from Carlos's cold reception. He seemed more preoccupied with his own routine than with what she had lived through. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Isabel tried to immerse herself back into her daily routine, dedicating herself to her work as a graphic designer and spending time with friends. But those outings no longer held the same allure. Everything felt bland compared to the adventures she had experienced in the desert and the moments she had shared with José. Every night, as she closed her eyes, she found herself transported to the golden streets of Riyadh, to José's warm smile, to that sense of infinite possibilities that only he seemed to awaken in her. Clara's calls, her cousin's voice like a lifeline, kept her connected to that distant world of dreams and discoveries. Clara, radiant with the happiness of her pregnancy, would talk about her new life, her husband, and how her family had transformed. But always, with a knowing smile, she mentioned José. "He asks about you, you know. He says he's never met anyone like you." Isabel's heart raced every time Clara mentioned José, but a deep sense of guilt gnawed at her. How could she think of another man when Carlos, though distant, had been her partner for so long? Doubts plagued her at unexpected moments, while cooking dinner, during long work meetings, or in the sleepless hours of the night. Carlos, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing inside Isabel, continued with his indifferent and sometimes dismissive demeanor. One day, when Isabel suggested dining at a new restaurant, Carlos quipped, "So, the Arabian Princess act is over now?" During one of those tense evenings, Clara called with news. She was pregnant. The joy in her voice was contagious, and for a moment, Isabel allowed herself to share in that happiness. But soon, Clara dropped a bombshell. "It's important that you're here," she said with urgency. Clara's offer lingered in the air, full of promise and threat. Isabel knew that accepting would mean confronting her buried feelings, seeing José again, and testing the fragile stability of her relationship with Carlos. That night, while Carlos snored beside her, Isabel stepped out onto the apartment balcony. The city stretched before her, a sea of flickering lights that somehow seemed dull compared to the memories of the desert's starlit nights. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she could feel the warm breeze of the Persian Gulf brushing her skin, hear the murmur of spices and incense, and recall José's gentle laughter. The decision formed in her mind with clarity before she could rationalize it. She would go to Riyadh. She told herself it was for something greater, for someone else. The preparations for the trip were a whirlwind of anxiety and excitement. Carlos, as always, reacted with indifference, muttering, "Off to the Arabs again?" Isabel packed with trembling hands, each item chosen carefully, knowing that every piece of clothing carried a meaningful decision. What should she bring to see José? Was it wrong to even think about that? She felt like a teenager preparing for a first date, not a grown woman in a relationship that, while stable, had left her feeling empty. The night before her departure, Isabel couldn't sleep. Her thoughts swirled in a storm of conflicting emotions. On one side, the safety of her life with Carlos, a familiar but imperfect relationship, and on the other, the promise of something new, exciting, and potentially transformative with José. As dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Isabel made a choice. This trip would be a test, an opportunity to understand what she truly wanted in life. She would allow herself to feel and experience without guilt or restraint. And in the end, when she returned to Mexico, she would make a definitive decision about her future. With her decision made, Isabel closed the suitcase with a deep sigh. Each zipper she fastened seemed to mark the end of a chapter and the beginning of a new journey that would change her life forever. The taxi waiting under the dim streetlight felt like a threshold between her past life and an uncertain future, full of new possibilities. Each step she took toward the car distanced her from the familiar, a life filled with predictable routines and the apparent safety of her relationship with Carlos. At the same time, every step brought her closer to a horizon full of uncertainty, but also promises, as if the city itself was calling her. The plane landed in Riyadh amid a fierce sandstorm, as though the desert wanted to wrap the city in a shroud of mystery, hiding it from the eyes of newcomers. Isabel gazed through the fogged windows, watching the city slowly emerge from the waves of dust, a golden mirage defying the storm's fury. The skyscrapers stood tall like giants, challenging the wind and sand, and Isabel's heart beat in time with the grains striking the fuselage, a turbulent prelude to what lay ahead. At the airport, Clara was waiting for her, radiant, her visibly rounded belly and glowing face brimming with palpable happiness. The hug they shared seemed to stretch beyond mere seconds, as if trying to make up for all the time lost during months of separation. "You're finally here," Clara exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with contained emotion. "There's so much to tell you, so much to show you." The drive from the airport was a whirlwind of nervous laughter and hurried words. Clara spoke endlessly about the baby's arrival, the wonderful life she was building with her husband, and how life in Riyadh had exceeded all her expectations. Isabel listened, laughing and reflecting in silence, her heart beating faster at the realization that Clara had found her place in the world. Then Clara, with a mischievous smile, dropped the news Isabel had both dreaded and longed to hear. "José has been asking about you, you know? I think he'd like to know you've arrived." Isabel's heart skipped a beat, and suddenly, the car's air conditioning wasn't enough to cool the heat she felt. The days that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences and emotions. Isabel plunged into Riyadh's life with a fervor that surprised even herself. She accompanied Clara to choose decorations for the baby's room, marveled at tasting exotic dishes in luxurious restaurants, and explored a city where the old met the modern on every corner. And it was during an intimate dinner celebrating the baby's arrival that José appeared. Isabel saw him enter, and in that instant, time seemed to freeze. He was even more handsome than she remembered, his warm smile lighting up the room as though sunlight had poured through the windows. Their eyes met across the table, and the world seemed to fade around them. José and Isabel began to talk, and the conversation flowed so naturally that the months of separation felt non-existent. They spoke of art, music, dreams, fears, every word, every gesture stirring something inside Isabel that had been dormant for so long. That night, lying in Clara's guest room, Isabel made a decision. With trembling hands, she pulled out the mobile phone she had secretly purchased before her trip, a new number, a new identity, an opportunity to explore these feelings, unburdened by her life in Mexico. Days became a secret dance of messages and furtive meetings. José took her to hidden corners of Riyadh, tiny cafes tucked away in ancient alleys, avant-garde art galleries in modern buildings. Together, they watched sunsets in the desert that painted the sky with fiery strokes. With every shared moment, Isabel felt something powerful and terrifying growing within her. It wasn't just attraction, nor a superficial infatuation. It was something deeper, a connection that defied words. But guilt consumed her. Every night before sleeping, she looked at Carlos's photo on her phone, the tenuous link to her life in Mexico. 15 years of history couldn't be erased overnight. How could she feel this way about José while still being committed to Carlos? Clara, ever observant, noticed the change in her. One afternoon, as they sipped tea on the balcony overlooking the Persian Gulf, Clara broached the subject with care. "You seem different, Isabel. More alive, happier." Isabel felt tears well up in her eyes. All the confusion, fear, and emotion she had been suppressing spilled out in that moment. Through sobs, she told Clara everything. Her encounters with José, the feelings stirring within her, the fear of hurting Carlos. Clara listened in silence, her gaze filled with understanding and affection. When Isabel finished, her cousin took her hands and said firmly, "Sometimes, love arrives when you least expect it, and in the most unconventional ways. But when love is genuine, when it makes you feel more like yourself, you can't ignore it." Isabel heard Clara's words as a distant yet clear echo, a wake-up call. That night, after another intimate dinner with José at a restaurant overlooking the Riyadh fountain, Isabel knew a decision had to be made. Although her heart pounded with fear, she also felt an odd sense of peace. She called Carlos. The conversation hit her like a cold shock. Broken words, awkward silences, and overwhelming emotions filled the air. Carlos alternated between disbelief, anger, and pleading. "How can you do this to me?" he shouted, his voice full of pain and resentment. 15 years together, and you throw it all away for a stranger." Isabel tried to explain, to make him understand that it wasn't just about José, but about her own life, what she wanted to be, how she felt living a life that no longer represented her. But Carlos couldn't grasp her words. His final statement before hanging up was a veiled threat. "This isn't over, Isabel. I'm not losing you like this." Isabel expected to feel relieved after ending the relationship, but she didn't. Instead, a mix of guilt, fear, and a strange sense of freedom took hold of her. That night, as Riyadh glittered under the desert moon, Isabel couldn't stop crying. She cried for the end of a chapter in her life, for the memories, and for what she had left behind. But she also cried for the uncertain future that lay ahead. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. When José learned about the breakup, he was patient and understanding, giving her the space she needed to process everything. Clara and her husband became her unwavering support, offering comfort and advice. Gradually, Isabel began to relax and enjoy her time with José. There were no more secrets between them, no more guilt. Now, they could walk together through the streets of Riyadh, share kisses under the starry desert sky, and plan a future untainted by the past. It was during one of these happy moments, as they strolled through the palace gardens, that José stopped in front of an arch of roses. With a gentle gesture, he took Isabel's hands in his, and with a gaze full of promises, asked the question that would change their lives forever. "Isabel, my love, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. The scent of flowers, the murmur of voices around them, everything disappeared. Only the two of them remained, their heartbeats in sync. Isabel looked deeply into José's eyes and saw everything she had ever dreamed of: love, respect, and partnership. "Yes," she answered, her voice barely a whisper but filled with conviction. "Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss that followed was a promise, the beginning of a new life together. As José slid the diamond ring onto her finger, Isabel felt she had finally found her place in the world, her oasis in the desert. The days after José's proposal were a whirlwind of emotions, plans, and shared dreams. Riyadh, with its unique blend of tradition and modernity, seemed like the perfect backdrop for their love story, a love that transcended cultural and geographical boundaries. Clara, heavily pregnant, couldn't stop smiling and exclaimed with excitement, I knew it, you two were meant to be together." Her happiness was infectious, and soon Isabel was immersed in preparations for a wedding that would blend the best of Mexican and Arab traditions. José, attentive and caring, took charge of every detail, anticipating Isabel's needs. José's family welcomed her with open arms. The matriarchs taught her local customs, and the men competed to share stories of José's youth. But amidst all the joy, a shadow lingered in Isabel's heart: Carlos. Despite the distance and time, his presence still weighed on her mind. The messages and calls didn't stop, alternating between desperate pleas and veiled threats. One night, as Isabel and José dined on the terrace of their new apartment overlooking the Burj Khalifa, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Carlos. "Don't think this is over. What we have is stronger than any desert mirage." A chill ran down Isabel's spine, but she chose not to share her concerns with José. She didn't want the shadows of the past to dim the happiness she felt in that moment. She was learning Arabic, exploring the city's oldest corners in search of hidden secrets, and marveling at how the desert and modernity coexisted in perfect harmony. Each day brought new adventures and discoveries, and with every passing moment, Isabel grew more confident in her decision to stay. However, the nostalgia for Mexico and her family would sometimes strike her at the most unexpected moments. It could be the aroma of a dish that brought her mother's kitchen to mind, the distant sound of a Spanish song coming from a taxi, or even the sight of a Mexican tourist family in a shopping mall. In those moments, Isabel found herself questioning her choices, wondering if she was making the right decision, if she wasn't giving up too much for this new love she had found in Riyadh. Was it fair to her family? To her story? She stood at a crossroads, torn between the love that had transformed her and the life she had left behind. It was during one of those moments of doubt that the call came. Her mother's voice on the other end of the line, broken with pain, informed her that her father had suffered a heart attack. Though stable, the doctors recommended urgent surgery. "We need you here, my daughter," her mother pleaded, her voice filled with a desperation that shattered Isabel's heart. The news hit her like a bucket of cold water. Suddenly, the distance between Riyadh and Mexico felt insurmountable, and all her dreams and plans for the future seemed to dissolve in an instant. Without hesitation, Isabel began packing her bags, determined to fly that very night, despite the fear and uncertainty she felt. José, ever understanding, insisted on accompanying her. "Your family is my family now," he said firmly, holding her hands tightly. "We'll face this together." The journey to Mexico was long, uncomfortable, and filled with tension. Every minute of the flight a torment for Isabel, who couldn't stop thinking about her father in the hospital. Finally, upon landing in Mexico City, the contrast with Riyadh was overwhelming. The chaotic city, filled with familiar smells, noises, and its characteristic bustle, enveloped her, bringing with it a mix of nostalgia and anxiety. Everything she had left behind, the hectic life of her hometown, felt like a distant memory, and the harsh reality of her present situation hit her with full force. At the hospital, the scene that greeted them was heartbreaking. Her father, always a figure of strength, now lay in a bed surrounded by rhythmically beeping machines. Her mother, the exhaustion and worry etched into her face, hugged them tightly. "Thank God you're here," she whispered, her eyes filled with relief at their arrival. The following days were a whirlwind of medical consultations, hushed conversations in hospital corridors, and sleepless nights by her father's bedside. José, quiet but present, became a pillar of support for Isabel, showing kindness and attentiveness to her family. Through his dedication, he earned their respect and affection. One night, while Isabel sipped coffee in the hospital cafeteria, she found herself face to face with Carlos. Time seemed to stand still as they looked at each other, old wounds and shared memories hanging between them like an invisible wall. "So it's true," Carlos said in a broken voice, his pain evident in every word. "You're going to marry him?" It wasn't a question, but a statement, as if he was finally accepting the inevitable. Isabel, unable to find the words to respond, felt her heart breaking in two. How could she explain that her heart now beat to the rhythm of a different life, to the rhythm of a love that made her feel whole? Carlos stepped closer, his voice faltering. "I truly hope you'll be happy," he murmured, and with those words, he turned and walked away, carrying with him 15 years of memories and the promise of what might have been. That night, as she cried in José's arms, Isabel felt that a chapter of her life had definitively closed. The pain of farewell mingled with the sense of finally being on the right path. Days passed, and little by little, her father's health improved. The surgery was a success, and with each passing day, Isabel saw life return to her father's eyes. One quiet afternoon, as they sat alone in the hospital room, her father took her hand and looked at the ring on her finger. "He's a good man," he said, referring to José. "I see it in his eyes, in the way he looks at you. He truly loves you." He paused, tears welling up in his eyes. "You're going to be very happy, my little girl. And even if you go far away, you'll always be our daughter." Those words were the final push Isabel needed. With her family's blessing and certainty in her heart, she made her final decision. She would move permanently to Riyadh and begin her new life with José. The return to Riyadh felt different this time. She was no longer a visitor, a tourist exploring a new world. Now it was her home, the place where she would build her future. As the plane landed and the city lights sparkled under the desert night, Isabel felt a deep peace, a calm she had never experienced before. José was waiting for her at the airport, his smile as warm as the desert sun. "Welcome home, my love," he said as he embraced her. And in that moment, in the arms of the man she loved, with the memory of her family in Mexico in her heart, Isabel knew she had finally found her place in the world. The months following Isabel's return to Riyadh were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The city, with its frenetic pace and constant evolution, seemed to mirror the couple's mood, filled with anticipation, nervousness, and overwhelming joy. The preparations for the wedding became the center of their lives. Every decision, from the venue to the design of the invitations, was a fascinating blend of Mexican and Arab traditions. Isabel found herself immersed in a world she had never imagined. A setting of exquisite fabrics, intoxicating aromas of spices, and ancestral rituals that transported her to a completely different culture. José's family, warm and generous, wholeheartedly dedicated themselves to the wedding preparations. José's aunts and cousins took Isabel to the most exclusive corners of the city, where they spent hours laughing and chatting animatedly while choosing fabrics for her wedding dress. Every thread, every detail was designed to make her shine like a jewel in the middle of the desert. The dress would be a masterpiece, a perfect fusion of Western elegance and the richness of Arab culture. The golden threads, the delicately crafted white lace, the pearls and crystals reflecting the desert sunlight, all were designed to make her feel like a princess from the tales of 1001 Nights. Meanwhile, José took care of the practical aspects of the wedding, ensuring every detail was in place. The venue for the ceremony was a luxurious resort on the outskirts of Riyadh, where the desert met the sea, providing a breathtaking backdrop for their union. The ceremony would take place at sunset, as the sky was painted in golden and pink hues, creating a magical atmosphere. Clara, fully recovered from childbirth, and now with her baby in her arms, became Isabel's closest support. Together, they spent hours discussing every detail, from the music to the menu. "I want this to be a celebration of both cultures," Isabel insisted firmly. Thus, the menu would combine traditional Mexican dishes with exquisite Arab delicacies, a feast promised to be unforgettable. As the big day approached, Isabel experienced a mix of excitement and growing anxiety. Although she was happy, she couldn't stop thinking about her family in Mexico and the friends she had left behind. Would they truly understand her decision? Could they forgive her for choosing a life so far away from them? One night, during these moments of uncertainty, José surprised her with a gesture that erased all her doubts. He had arranged a video call with her family in Mexico. On the screen, Isabel saw the smiling faces of her parents, siblings, uncles, and cousins, all gathered to give her their blessing and love, despite the distance. "We couldn't miss your big day, my daughter," her father said, his voice filled with emotion. "Even though we can't be there physically, our hearts will be with you every moment." Isabel felt her lingering doubts fade away. In that moment, surrounded by her family's love, she knew she was making the right decision. The night before the wedding, following a beautiful Arab tradition, the night of the henna was celebrated. Women from both families gathered in a suite at the hotel, adorned with silk cushions and oil lamps that cast a soft, warm glow. As skilled artists applied intricate henna designs to Isabel's hands and feet, the women sang traditional songs, sharing laughter and advice on married life. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, José celebrated with the men, enjoying his last night of bachelorhood. Finally, the morning of the wedding arrived with a clear sky and radiant sunshine, as if the desert itself wanted to bless their union. Isabel woke up with her heart racing, a mix of nerves and excitement filling her. The final preparations unfolded quickly. Stylists and makeup artists worked with precision, transforming Isabel into a vision of breathtaking beauty. Her dress, a work of art, captured the light and seemed to radiate a life of its own. As she looked at herself in the mirror, Isabel could hardly believe the transformation, not just in her appearance, but in her life. Who would have imagined, just a year ago, that she would be here, about to marry the man of her dreams in a country that now felt like home? A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Clara, radiant in her bridesmaid dress. "It's time," she said with a smile full of emotion. "Everyone is waiting for you." With one last glance in the mirror and a deep breath, Isabel prepared to take the most important step of her life. As she walked toward the door, each step brought her closer not only to José, but to a future filled with love, adventures, and infinite possibilities. The hallway leading to the ceremony was adorned with arches of white and gold flowers, creating a tunnel of beauty and fragrance. As Isabel walked, escorted by her father, who had traveled from Mexico for the occasion, she could hear the perfect blend of Arabic and mariachi music they had chosen for the ceremony, a wonderful symbol of the union of their two cultures. At the end of the aisle, beneath a white silk canopy swaying gently in the desert breeze, stood José. His face lit up with a smile that rivaled the sunset as he saw her. In that moment, everything else faded away. There were no doubts, no fears, no memories of the past. Only the two of them existed, on the verge of starting a new life together. The ceremony was a marvelous fusion of traditions. A local imam guided the Islamic portion, while a Catholic priest who had traveled from Mexico officiated the Christian vows. Isabel and José exchanged rings, their voices trembling with emotion as they made promises of eternal love in Arabic and Spanish, their hearts overflowing. When they were finally pronounced husband and wife, the sky lit up with a dazzling display of fireworks, breaking the desert's darkness and filling the air with color and light. The guests clapped and cheered, showering the happy couple with rose petals and rice. The reception that followed was a celebration of life, a feast of flavors and music that lasted well into the early hours. The tables, laden with a mix of delights from both cultures, offered a banquet that enchanted the senses. The music alternated between the vibrant rhythm of mariachi and the soft melodies of Arabic tunes, and the joy in the air was palpable, as if two worlds had united in a single celebration. As they danced their first waltz as husband and wife, José leaned his head close to Isabel's, whispering tenderly, "Are you happy, my love?" Isabel, with tears of joy in her eyes, could only nod, for words weren't enough to express the fullness of her heart. She had found not only the love of her life, but also a new home, a new family, and a life filled with promises and new adventures. When the party finally ended and the last guests departed, Isabel and José found themselves alone in the bridal suite. Standing on the balcony, gazing at the vast desert illuminated by the soft glow of the moon, Isabel felt a profound calm, as if the entire world had stopped spinning to let them savor this moment. "What are you thinking about?" José asked, wrapping his arms around her. "How lucky I am," Isabel replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "How life can lead you down unexpected and wonderful paths if you have the courage to follow your heart." José kissed her gently, his smile full of hope. "This is only the beginning, my love. We have a whole lifetime ahead to write our own tales from 1,001 nights." And so, under the starry desert sky, Isabel and José began their new life together, as if they were the protagonists of a modern fairy tale born from the blending of two worlds. The morning after the wedding dawned with an unusual stillness. The desert seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing something significant was about to happen. Isabel woke up in José's arms, her heart brimming with happiness and hope as she thought about the future they had just begun. The plan for the day was simple. After a late breakfast with close family members who had yet to depart, the couple would head to their new home, a luxury apartment in the heart of Riyadh with panoramic views of the city and the desert beyond. They would spend a few days there before leaving for their honeymoon, a trip to the paradise islands of Southeast Asia. Breakfast was a joyful affair, filled with laughter and plans for the future. Isabel's parents, who would stay in Riyadh for a few more days, couldn't hide their happiness and pride. "I've never seen you so radiant, my dear," her mother said with tears in her eyes. "José is a good man, and it's clear he loves you with all his heart." After emotional farewells and promises to stay in touch, Isabel and José got into their car, a luxury sports car José's family had gifted them as a wedding present. With the veil of her wedding dress fluttering through the open window and the wedding ring shining on her finger, Isabel felt as though she were living a dream. The drive through the city began peacefully. José drove carefully, pointing out various landmarks and sharing his plans for the future. "Look over there," he said, gesturing toward a skyscraper under construction. "That's where my new office will be." "And beyond that, do you see that park?" he added. "We could go there on weekends, maybe someday with our kids." Isabel smiled at the mention of children, a possibility that had once seemed distant, but now, with José, felt like a beautiful promise. Just as she was about to respond, she noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. A black car was following them closely, too closely for comfort. A chill ran down her spine, but she tried to dismiss it. This was their day of happiness, she thought. Nothing could go wrong. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The black car suddenly accelerated, violently ramming into the back of José's vehicle. The impact was so forceful that Isabel felt as if the entire world had been shaken. José fought to keep control of the car, but the speed and force of the collision were too great. The car skidded, spinning out of control. Isabel screamed, her hand instinctively reaching for José's. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and within them swirled a storm of terror and love that seemed to scream simultaneously, "I'm sorry, and I love you." Then, the entire world plunged into darkness. When Isabel regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the penetrating smell of gasoline and the distant sound of sirens. She tried to move, but an unbearable pain coursed through her body. Looking down, she saw her wedding dress, once pristine and radiant, now dirty and torn. A chilling fear swept through her as she realized they were trapped in the overturned car at the edge of a cliff. José, his voice weak and broken, called out to her, but her response was barely a whisper. In the distance, frantic voices and hurried footsteps approached. Someone was shouting for help, their trembling voice painting the scene. "A terrible accident. The car has fallen into the ravine. We need to get them out." The following moments were a blur, filled with the desperate efforts of rescue teams fighting to free them, and the crushing fear tightening in Isabel's chest. Consciousness wavered as physical pain battled against the hollow ache in her heart. Where was José? Why wasn't he responding? When they finally pulled her from the car, the desert sun momentarily blinded her. Through a haze of confusion and pain, she saw paramedics frantically working on a figure lying on the ground. "José, he has no pulse," one of the paramedics shouted. "Beginning CPR." Isabel tried to scream, to move toward him, but her body refused to obey. She felt herself being lifted onto a stretcher, the sound of sirens drowning her faint pleas. "José, please! José!" The ride to the hospital was a blurred nightmare. Isabel fought to stay conscious, clinging to the hope that this was just a terrible dream from which she would soon awaken. At the hospital, chaos reigned. Doctors and nurses hurried back and forth, their urgent voices calling for equipment and issuing orders. Isabel was rushed into surgery, her broken and battered body in immediate need of care. Hours later, when she awoke in the intensive care unit, the first thing she saw was her mother's tear-streaked face. "Mama," she murmured, her voice weak and raspy. "Where is José?" Her mother, tears streaming down her face, squeezed her hand tightly. "Oh, my darling," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." In that moment, Isabel knew. Before her mother could utter the words, before the cruel reality could be confirmed, she already knew. José was gone. Her love, her future, her dreams, all vanished in a single moment, as swiftly as the accident that had torn them apart. The scream that erupted from her throat was the sound of a shattered heart, a soul ripped into 1,000 pieces. It echoed through the hospital halls, bringing nurses running into her room with sedatives in hand. The days that followed spiraled into a haze of physical and emotional agony. Isabel drifted in a sea of medication and despair, unable to grasp the magnitude of her loss. Her body healed slowly from fractures and bruises, but her heart, irreparably broken, refused to mend. José's family, equally devastated by his loss, stayed close to Isabel, offering silent support. José's mother, her eyes swollen from crying, spent long hours at Isabel's bedside, holding her hand in silence. Their shared grief forged a bond deeper than words. Meanwhile, news of the tragic accident spread rapidly through Riyadh and beyond. Newspapers, both local and international, ran the story of the young couple whose love story had turned into a tragedy. Wedding photos, taken just a day before the accident, were juxtaposed with images of the wrecked car in the ravine. As Isabel began to regain her strength, questions about the accident emerged, hinting at the possibility of something darker behind what had happened. Riyadh's police launched a thorough investigation, but answers remained elusive. One night, as Isabel gazed out the hospital window at the twinkling lights of the city that had once seemed magical, a detective arrived to speak with her. Gently, he showed her security camera footage from the day of the accident. The black car that had followed and rammed into them. There was something familiar about it. A chill ran down Isabel's spine as she recognized the vehicle. It was the same model her ex-boyfriend Carlos used to drive in Mexico. But no, it couldn't be. Carlos was in Mexico, thousands of miles away. No. The seed of doubt crept into her mind like a venomous weed. Could Carlos, in his obsession, have gone to such lengths? Could he have been capable of destroying not only her happiness, but also José's life? As she wrestled with those torturous questions, Isabel knew one thing. She needed answers. She wasn't fighting just for herself, but also for José, for the life that had been stolen from them, for the future they could no longer share. Driven by the pain and anger consuming her, Isabel decided that as soon as she recovered enough, she would seek the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Days stretched into weeks, and gradually, Isabel began to regain her physical strength. Yet the wound in her soul remained open, bleeding like a scar that would never truly heal. Every corner of Riyadh reminded her of José. Every sunset over the desert echoed the dreams they had once shared, now lost forever. José's funeral was a surreal experience. Clad entirely in black, a cruel contrast to the radiant white of her wedding dress, Isabel stood by his grave, unable to cry, feeling nothing but a void so deep it threatened to consume her. Words of comfort and pity-filled glances fell on her like water on oil, unable to penetrate the icy wall that surrounded her. It was during the funeral, among the crowd of mourners, that something unusual caught her attention. In the distance, in the shadows, she thought she saw a familiar face, a face that didn't belong there. For a fleeting moment, she was certain it was Carlos, watching from afar, his expression a mask of conflicting emotions. But when she blinked and looked again, the figure had vanished. Had it been real, or merely a product of her shattered mind? Isabel wasn't sure, but the seed of doubt was planted, and it began to grow. As the days passed, Isabel threw herself fully into investigating the accident. Working closely with the Riyadh police, she pored over hours of security camera footage, flight logs, and hotel records. Every clue, no matter how small, she pursued with fierce determination, convinced that uncovering the truth was the only way to honor José's memory and make sense of the tragedy that had taken everything from her. She spent countless sleepless nights connecting dots, piecing together fragments, searching for that missing link that would explain it all. José's family, worried for her well-being, tried to convince her to return to Mexico to distance herself from Riyadh's painful memories, but Isabel refused outright. She couldn't leave, not until she knew the truth, not until she could bring justice in José's name. One night, as she combed through yet another set of leads, Isabel received an anonymous call. A distorted voice, almost a whisper, told her, "Not all accidents are accidental. Search the desert, where secrets are buried in the sand." The cryptic message sent a chill down her spine, but also sparked a glimmer of hope. Could this be the lead she had been waiting for? Wasting no time, Isabel contacted a local private detective, someone with access to Riyadh's dark underbelly. Together, they began to unravel a web of lies and deceit that extended far beyond the tragic accident. As they dug deeper into the investigation, they uncovered disturbing connections. The black car that had rammed into them had been rented through a shell company, which, as it turned out, had ties to shady dealings in Mexico. Each new piece of evidence brought them closer to a truth that Isabel feared, but knew she had to face. Could Carlos have crossed oceans and borders to destroy her happiness? Or was there something even darker, something more sinister at play? As the investigation progressed, Isabel underwent a transformation. Pain and loss had forged her into a woman of unyielding will. She was no longer the young woman who had come to Riyadh seeking love and adventure. Now, she was someone determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The nights in the desert, once filled with romance and promises, were now steeped in mystery and danger. Isabel delved into the darkest corners of Riyadh, a place where money and power hid the most harrowing secrets. With each step closer to the truth, she felt herself inching toward the justice José deserved, though at a steep price. But she also knew she was treading a dangerous path, one from which there might be no return. One night, as the moon bathed the desert dunes in its silver light, Isabel found herself standing in the very place where she had been happiest, and where she had lost everything. With one hand over her heart and the other clutching José's wedding ring, she made a silent vow. "I will find you justice, my love," she whispered to the desert wind. "No matter the cost, no matter where it takes me, I will uncover the truth and honor your memory. This is not the end of our story. It is only the beginning of my quest for the truth." Under the vast starry sky of the desert, Isabel ventured into the most perilous chapter of her life, a journey that would confront her not only with the demons of her past, but also with far darker and more terrifying forces than she had ever imagined. The sun was sinking slowly into the desert horizon, painting the sky a crimson red, as Isabel received a call that would alter the course of her investigation. It was the private detective she had hired, his voice deep and urgent on the other end of the line. "Ms. Isabel," he said, his tone sending a shiver through her body. "We've found something big. I need to meet you immediately." Without a moment's hesitation, Isabel headed to the agreed meeting point, a discreet cafe on the outskirts of Riyadh, far from the city's bustle. The place was quiet, nearly empty. Only a few tables were occupied by businessmen absorbed in their laptops and weary tourists enjoying their last coffee before returning to their hotels. The detective, a middle-aged man with a sharp gaze and a perfectly trimmed mustache, waited for her at a secluded table in the farthest corner of the cafe. As soon as Isabel sat down, the detective opened his briefcase and slid a thick folder across the table. "What I'm about to show you," he said in a low voice, "could be dangerous. Are you sure you want to proceed?" Isabel didn't hesitate. "I need to know the truth," she replied, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly. The detective nodded, wasting no time as he opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and transcripts of phone calls. However, what immediately caught Isabel's attention was a series of photographs. They depicted a man she knew all too well, Carlos. The images showed him in various locations around Riyadh before and after the accident. In one photo, he was speaking with a suspicious man in a dark alley. In another, he was getting into the same model of black car that had collided with José's vehicle. "We've been tracking his movements," the detective explained gravely. "He arrived in Riyadh 3 days before the wedding. He checked into a hotel under a false name and began following José. But this is what's truly intriguing." The detective pointed to a transcript of an intercepted conversation between Carlos and an unidentified man. They talk about a job and specifically mention the wedding date. Isabel felt the world around her begin to fade. The puzzle pieces were coming together, forming a sharp and terrifying image. Carlos had not only followed her to Riyadh, but had actively planned to destroy her happiness. "But why?" Isabel whispered, more to herself than to the detective. "How could he go this far?" The detective looked at her with a mix of compassion and sadness. "Love and hate are two sides of the same coin, ma'am. Sometimes, when love turns into obsession, it becomes something much darker and more dangerous." As Isabel processed this revelation, the detective continued unveiling more details. There was evidence linking Carlos to the rental of the black car, witnesses who had seen him loitering near the accident site, and even a security recording showing a similar vehicle speeding away from the scene shortly after the collision. Each new piece of evidence was a direct blow to Isabel's heart. The thought that someone she had once loved so deeply could be capable of such cruelty was almost unbearable. Yet, at the same time, a fierce determination grew within her. Now that she knew the truth, she would not rest until justice was served. "And now, what do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling but carrying a newfound, steely resolve. The detective looked at her seriously. "We have enough evidence to take this to the authorities. But I must warn you, Ms. Isabel, once we set this in motion, there's no turning back. Your life could be in danger." Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, letting the detective's words sink in. She remembered José's smile, the sparkle in his eyes when he proposed, the warmth of his embrace. When she opened her eyes again, they burned with unwavering determination. "I don't care about the danger," she said firmly. "José deserves justice, and I won't rest until I get it." The detective nodded in approval. "Very well, then here's what we'll do." The next hours were a whirlwind of activity. Isabel and the detective met with the Riyadh authorities, presenting all the evidence they had gathered. The police, impressed by the thoroughness of the investigation, acted swiftly. An international arrest warrant was issued for Carlos, and ports and airports across the United Arab Emirates were alerted. The net was slowly closing in, and with each passing day, Isabel felt her life hurtling toward a destiny she could neither comprehend nor avoid. Meanwhile, the authorities decided to place her under police protection, fully aware of the imminent danger Carlos represented. The likelihood that he would try to silence her in some way was too high. For her safety, a 24-hour security team was assigned to her, and she was advised to limit her movements as much as possible. The days passed in unbearable agony, filled with uncertainty and anxiety. Every sound, every passing shadow made Isabel jump, wondering if Carlos was lurking nearby, hiding in the darkness. Yet, at the same time, she felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time since the accident, she felt she was doing something real, something that honored José's memory in the only way possible. A week after her meeting with the detective, the news came like a thunderbolt. The police had located Carlos attempting to cross the border into Oman. There had been a chase, a shootout, and finally, his capture. Isabel felt a mix of relief and disgust when she saw Carlos for the first time since the accident. He was handcuffed, escorted by police officers, but she could barely recognize the man she had once loved. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, filled with rage and despair. For a moment, their eyes met, and time seemed to stop. A chill ran down Isabel's spine, a deep shiver that made her question if she had ever truly known him. The trial that followed turned into a media circus. The story of the young widow, the jealous ex-boyfriend, and the tragic accident captivated the entire world. Journalists from every corner of the globe descended on Riyadh, eager to capture every detail. Isabel stood firm throughout the judicial process, testifying with an impressive strength that even surprised the most experienced judges. She recounted her love story with José, the dreams and promises they had shared, and how it had all crumbled when faced with the painful reality of betrayal. When the evidence of Carlos's involvement in the accident became irrefutable, he finally confessed. His statement, full of bitterness and belated regret, revealed the depth of his obsession and a love that had turned into a harrowing hatred. He admitted he couldn't bear to see her happy with someone else. "I thought if I couldn't have her, no one else would," he confessed in a broken voice. The verdict was swift and unanimous. Carlos was found guilty. As he was escorted out of the courtroom, his eyes sought Isabel one last time. The look they shared was a strange mix of unsolicited forgiveness and defiance, as though they couldn't stop confronting each other. With the trial over and justice served, Isabel found herself once again at a crossroads. The long-sought truth was finally uncovered, but the void in her heart remained as deep as ever. Riyadh, which had once been the setting of her sweetest dreams, now felt laden with bitter memories. One sleepless night, while walking alone through the city's deserted streets, Isabel made a decision. She couldn't stay in Riyadh, but neither could she return to Mexico. She needed a place where she could honor José's memory without being constantly reminded of her pain. With a heavy yet determined heart, she began planning her new beginning. She sold the apartment she had shared with José, donating most of the proceeds to a foundation for traffic accident victims. She packed the few belongings she wanted to keep, including José's wedding ring. Though it saddened her to leave everything behind, she understood she needed to move forward. She promised her loved ones she would stay in touch, but knew she had to distance herself to heal. On the day of her departure, Isabel paid a final visit to José's grave. She placed a bouquet of desert flowers, the same ones that had adorned their wedding, and stood in silence for a long time, saying goodbye to the man she had loved and lost. "I will carry you in my heart always," she whispered, her fingers tracing José's name on the headstone. "And I promise to live life to the fullest, for both of us." With one last look at Riyadh's skyline, where skyscrapers rose like dreams of glass and steel, Isabel boarded the plane that would take her toward an uncertain future. As the plane took off, Leaving behind the city that had witnessed her greatest happiness and her deepest pain, Isabel closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw José's smiling face, heard his laughter, and felt the warmth of his embrace. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she would carry the love she had shared with José, using it as a guide in the days to come. The sun set over the desert as the plane soared away, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. It was a new dawn for Isabel, a chapter in her life yet to be written. And though her heart still ached with loss, it beat with the promise of new adventures, new loves, and perhaps one day, the peace she so deeply yearned for. The years slipped by like the waves of the sea, gentle yet constant, as Isabel tried to rebuild her life far from Riyadh and the indelible marks the desert city had left on her soul. She had moved to a small coastal town in southern Spain, where the sun shone almost as intensely as it had in the desert she had left behind. There, amidst the murmurs of the Mediterranean and the distant cries of seagulls, she sought to find a purpose that could anchor her to a future that still felt uncertain. She opened an art gallery, a sanctuary where she showcased pieces by local artists alongside works inspired by her time in the Arab world. Art had become her escape, a way to channel the emotions that still churned within her. Memories, laughter, and nightmares all intertwined. Yet no matter how much she surrounded herself with beauty, the past clung to her shadow. The nights continued to bring vivid nightmares, images of the accident, and there were days when the weight of loss seemed heavier than everything she had managed to build. It was during one of those days of internal struggle, while walking along the beach at sunset, that the call came, shaking her to her core. It was Clara, her cousin, but her voice, tense and urgent, left no room for doubt. "Isabel," Clara said, her voice tinged with anguish, "new information has surfaced about the accident. You need to return to Riyadh, now!" Isabel's heart skipped a beat, as if an invisible weight pressed against her chest. 5 years had passed since the trial, since Carlos was convicted for José's death. What new information could have possibly emerged after all this time? Despite her disbelief, Clara's urgency was as sharp as a warning. Without overthinking, Isabel packed the essentials and booked the next available flight to Riyadh, unsure of what awaited her. The return was a mix of conflicting emotions. With every kilometer that brought her closer to the desert city, memories of José flooded her with overwhelming intensity. His smiling face, his laughter, the softness of his hand in hers, all followed by the nightmare of the accident, the screech of bending metal, the stench of gasoline, the void after the impact. Upon landing in Riyadh, the thick, warm air felt like a slap from the past. The city had changed, with new skyscrapers rising into the sky, but the air still carried the scent of spices and unfulfilled promises. Clara was waiting at the airport, her face a reflection of the anxiety and relief she felt upon seeing her cousin. They embraced tightly, as if trying to erase years of pain and separation. "What's going on, Clara?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling. "What new information has come up?" Clara glanced around cautiously before lowering her voice. "Not here. Let's go somewhere safe." The safe place turned out to be a small cafe away from the city's bustle. As they sat down, Clara let out a sigh, as though the words she was about to speak were too heavy. "A few weeks ago," she began, her tone grave, "a man came forward to the police. He claimed to have information about José's accident, information that changes everything we thought we knew." Isabel felt the air leave her lungs. What could Clara possibly mean by that? "What do you mean?" Her voice shook, unable to process her cousin's words. Clara took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. According to this man, Carlos wasn't alone. Someone else was involved, someone powerful, with extensive resources, someone who wanted José dead. The revelation struck Isabel like a blow to the chest, leaving her breathless. "But why?" she asked, her mind racing in 1,000 directions. "Who would want to harm José?" "That's what the police are trying to uncover," Clara replied. "But there's more. This man claims to have evidence that the accident wasn't just a jealous outburst from Carlos. It was something planned, orchestrated by someone who saw José as a threat." Isabel felt the ground beneath her feet crumble. For years, she had believed she knew the truth, that she had found the closure she so desperately sought. But now, that truth was dissolving, opening an abyss of doubt. "Who is this man?" Isabel asked, her mind racing to process everything Clara had said. "Why is he coming forward now after so much time?" Clara shook her head, frustration evident in her eyes. "I don't know. The police are being very secretive about the details, but there are rumors. Rumors that this man was involved in the accident and is now fearing for his life." Isabel leaned back in her chair, stunned. If what Clara said was true, it meant the real culprit behind José's death was still at large, and the justice she thought she had achieved was nothing more than an illusion. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice steadier now, determination replacing doubt. "I can't just sit here waiting while the police investigate. I need to know the truth." Isabel's words echoed with a force she hadn't known she possessed until that very moment. Clara fixed her gaze on her, her eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and concern. "I knew you would say that," Clara replied with a sigh. "That's why I brought you this." Clara pulled an envelope from her bag and slid it across the table to Isabel. When Isabel opened it, she found several documents, police reports, interview transcripts, and photographs. It was a complete dossier on the new investigation that had been progressing in secret. "How did you get this?" Isabel asked, both surprised and impressed by her cousin's audacity. Clara gave her a faint smile, one that, despite its fragility, conveyed the seriousness of the risk she had taken. "I have my connections," she answered, though her expression quickly darkened. "But Isabel, you need to be very careful. If someone powerful is truly behind all of this, you could be in grave danger." Isabel felt the weight of Clara's words. The risk was real, but deep in her heart, she knew there was no turning back. She owed it to José, to his memory, and most of all, to the truth she had been seeking for so long, no matter the cost. "Thank you, Clara," Isabel said, gripping her cousin's hand tightly. "I don't know what I would do without you." That night, in the solitude of her hotel room, Isabel immersed herself in the documents. Each page was a new piece of the puzzle, one that painted a far more complex and dangerous picture than she had ever imagined. There were mentions of suspicious financial transactions, veiled threats, and what appeared to be a conspiracy far greater than what had been revealed during the trial. But what truly sent a chill down her spine was a name that appeared over and over again: Álvaro. Isabel didn't recognize the name, but according to the reports, he seemed to wield significant influence in Riyadh's business circles. The transcript suggested that this man had seen José as a threat to his interests, and that appeared to be the driving force behind the tragedy. As the puzzle pieces began to fit together, Isabel felt a mix of horror and fierce determination rise within her. The truth she had been chasing for years was not merely about jealousy or revenge. It was something much darker, much more sinister. Yet, despite the revelation, she would not stop. She couldn't. As the sun began to rise over the desert horizon, Isabel made a decision. She would not rest until the true culprit behind José's death was brought to justice. This wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with secrets to uncover, intrigue to unravel, and dangers to face. With the first rays of sunlight illuminating the room, Isabel rose, her body filled with renewed determination. The path to the truth would be long, arduous, and perilous, but she was ready to face it. For José, for the justice she craved, and for the peace she had yet to find, she would press forward no matter where it led. The desert, with all its secrets, held answers, and Isabel was ready to unearth them, one by one, until the truth finally came to light. With her heart full of resolve and José's memory guiding her every step, she took the first stride on this new journey, a journey that would change not only her life, but the very fabric of Riyadh's history. The sun rose over the city, a new day began, and with it, Isabel's relentless pursuit of truth and justice. The story of Isabel and José was far from over. Indeed, it was just beginning. If this story has captivated you, we would love to receive your support with a like and a subscription to our channel of realistic stories. We would also be delighted to read your comments, as it is truly a pleasure for us to offer you enjoyable moments through each tale. We deeply appreciate the constant support you provide with every story. Blessings to you and your family.